LCC's never done before. It's called Jingle Jam, and we want you to come. For kids K through 5th grade, bring your whole family to experience Christmas with all your senses. Look, taste, touch, and hear the Christmas story. It's going to be a great time for the whole family to experience. You can get all the details and sign up on Facebook. Find Liverpool Family or at liverpoolfamily.com. We'll see you then.
Thanks, Kimber. Today is our last week in our series on mental health called Mirror Mirror, and the idea, in case you haven't gotten what it's about, the Mirror Mirror comes from the wicked queen person, Mirror Mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all, and her question of insecurity and doubt and all of that kind of stems all from the things that we've been talking about with mental illness, such as anxiety and depression. That was our first two things. Today we're going to be blessed by a professional therapist who's going to be here, and I've been asking you questions on Facebook and social media, and what is it like for you? And so we formulated some questions. We took some of your questions directly, and our goal today and through this whole series, not necessarily to fix anybody, because I believe that mental health issues and healing takes much longer than just a 3-week series. But our goal has been kind of to shed light on the things that people might be struggling with, so that you know you're not alone, and that there is healing, there is hope, there is another side to the things that you're dealing with. So today, we're going to be joined by a professional therapist named Melissa. She is a graduate from the University of Rochester with a master's in marriage and family therapy. She spent 4 years as a family therapist for children placed with their grandparents. That's a very specific thing to be doing, I think. She was an in-home therapist for youth and families where children were at risk of placement. And if you don't know what placement means, it means that they're going to be taken from their home and placed somewhere else. And so she's done that. And since 2016, Melissa has worked privately out of the Family Center in Baldwinsville, seeing individuals of all ages, male and female, families, couples, etc. Melissa is a Christian. Melissa is a wife. She is a mother of 2. She is also a therapist, and just in case you don't know, she works in the children's ministry here at Liverpool Christian Church. Would you welcome Melissa Raab? So a little bit of a teaser right here at the beginning. We're gonna do some of the questions that we didn't get to in first service, and we're gonna post both of the services, because I want to make sure that we have a kind of a complete picture, because it turns out a half hour is not enough to fix everybody's problems. Melissa, thanks for being here. Just really quick, what made you want to be a therapist?
I grew up wanting to help people, and starting from when I was a teenager, I was kind of that person for people that people just kind of approached and kind of shared their problems with, and so it just kind of fell in my lap almost.
Nice.
Yeah.
And do you think you'll stick with this career? Are you going to start selling cars or?
No, I think this is good. I like that. This is
Good.
good.
All right, so let's get started. What is a mental illness, and what does it mean to have a mental illness?
So a mental illness is a condition that affects a person's thinking, their feeling, their mood. It can affect their ability to relate to other people. It can affect their just daily functioning. There's all sorts of things that cause mental illness. It can be genetic, high stress, trauma. That's typically a link of a few different things that tend to cause mental illness.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Very well thought out answer. We did talk a little bit about this in first service, so I'm just going to encourage you to listen to the full answer. But there's a massive difference between mental illness and mental retardation, and so I think that there's some sort of societal misconception between the two. Can you just briefly explain the difference in those two things?
So they're just two completely different things. Mental illness is kind of what I just described. Mental retardation, which is now known as intellectual disability, is based on somebody's below average IQ, their ability to kind of have daily skills and things like that. So they're just two very different things.
Thank you. So we talked about in our series the anxiety and depression. Why were those two things in particular considered mental illness?
Just as kind of the definition of mental illness, both of those things affect our thinking, our mood, our feelings. So those are why those two things, anxiety and depression, are definitely considered mental illness because of the severity of those symptoms that they cause.
Yeah, we always want to blame something or somebody for what's wrong with us, and I think that's a very American thing for us to do. I mean, I don't know about other parts of the world. So, whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that somebody has anxiety or depression?
Nobody's. It's nobody's fault. And I think that it is definitely, like, we want to say, like, this one thing caused me to have depression, or this one thing caused me to have anxiety. And if it was that cut and dry, it would be fantastic, but it's not. It's typically a combination of many things, and there are people who can experience the same exact thing, and one may develop depression and the other person may not. So it's really hard to say what causes it because it's a combination of factors.
Yeah, I told this story in the first service. I read a story about two brothers who had an alcoholic father, and one of them grew up to become an alcoholic, and one of them grew up to not drink an ounce because they both saw what their father did. So he became a drunk because his dad was drunk, and he avoided that because his dad was drunk. And so that speaks to, that any circumstance can affect a person a different way because we're all so unique.
Yep.
I like this next question. Aren't we just playing into people's problems by giving them a name and talking about them all the time? Everyone struggles. Why can't you just accept that, grow up, and handle yourself?
So my answer to this is lengthy. So the first part of this is, this name thing. Why are we naming things? Names and diagnoses are not the be-all, end-all. They're not the most important thing, but they're certainly helpful. They're helpful for us as clinicians to be able to say, okay, this is what this person is coming in with. I know this because these are their symptoms, and this is what I know helps these symptoms, so this is what I'm going to use. And on the research side, it kind of helps get to maybe the bottom of this, why do I have anxiety question, or kind of start to really get to the heart of what's going to be most helpful and things like that. The second part is that, yes, everybody does struggle. And in fact, a lot of people that come to see me in therapy don't have full-blown mental illnesses. They have what I call adjustment disorders, where there is a significant life stressor going on and they're having trouble coping with that and needs the additional support. So I don't think kind of just brushing off struggle is necessarily helpful either, because they're important too. And finally, as a Christian, I think that the most Christ-like thing that I can do, either as a peer support or as a professional, is to be with somebody and to show them love in some of their most difficult circumstances. So that's why I can't just say, grow up and handle yourself.
Yeah.
I don't think it's very Christ-like.
I like that. I like that you describe yourself as a Christian who is a therapist, not a Christian therapist, because to me, I think that, for me personally, that gives more power to what you say after that. Like, I didn't seek this Christian therapy thing because it was all I could do or whatever, but it's because you're being guided by your faith into that, and I love that comes out by you saying, I can't, as a follower of Jesus, just slough off a thing. And I think that's important for us to note as people, that when someone comes to us with a struggle or pain or whatever, that we, if we're Christ followers, it's really kind of demeaning to slough off somebody and just, well, you just get over it, or whatever. Specifically concerning depression, what is it? And what are some of the places that depression comes from?
So depression is a mood disorder. We typically think of it as like extreme sadness, but it can also come out as irritability and other things. But it affects how people feel, it affects how they think, it affects their ability to participate in daily activities. So some people struggle with eating, some people struggle with sleeping, some people struggle with job performance or school performance. Again, there's a mix of things that cause depression. So there's a genetic component, there's potentially some chemical component like serotonin and things like that we hear about. There's high stress that can cause depression, there's trauma that can cause depression. So there's again, no one thing that causes depression, but multiple factors.
How does high stress cause depression? You just mentioned that. So I can see how I personally can see how a trauma would cause depression, but how does stress cause depression? Because I think we're pretty stressed out.
Yeah, so stress in and of itself won't. So stress with a predisposition to kind of have depressive features may cause depression.
Okay.
So it's kind of like the thing that spurs it.
Is that why some people thrive in stressful situations and others don't?
Mm-hmm.
Because, okay, maybe there's a predisposition to depression in that. With depression and with the mental health stuff, mental illness things that we've talked about, one of the things that came up through our asking questions was this idea of self-harm.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is self-harm? Does self-harm lead to depression, or does depression lead to self-harm, or how does that go? And what else do we need to know about self-harm?
So just generally speaking, self-harm is almost exactly what it sounds like. It's somebody doing something intentionally to hurt themselves. We often hear self-harm and we think of cutting. That tends to be the most common thing, but it can be something like picking scabs too much so they won't heal. It can be as significant as somebody breaking their own bones. So there's really a whole slew of things that can kind of be in the idea of self-harm. It's a signifier that there's some extreme emotional distress happening. So what it tends to be most often is somebody trying to cope with extreme emotional distress and not having a very healthy way to do that. It's what I would call a maladaptive coping skill. And it's not just related to depression. There's a lot of mental health disorders that self-harm kind of goes hand in hand with: depression, borderline personality disorder, eating disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, all kind of may have some self-harm components too.
Potentially, you're linking self-harm to not having a correct outlet to deal with the things that you're going on with. Is there a potential that that person who is self-harming doesn't have a good outlet because the people in their life have told them, oh, you're just making this up, get over it, or whatever? Is that because maybe they sought that outlet correctly and then it got shut down for
Absolutely. I
ignorance?
mean, that's definitely a potential factor. Again, there's no one cut and dry response to that, but and I think that a lot of times self-harm comes up when people think, well, it's just a cry for attention, it's just you know, it's not so serious. And the fact of the matter is that it's distress. It is somebody who is actually facing severe emotional distress, and it's not. There are many, many ways to get attention, and I think self-harm would probably not be one of them, or a significant last resort if that's the case.
You brought up that idea of it being some people say it's a cry for attention, and when I've done things differently in my life. Like, we had a family bed, and we didn't let our kids cry themselves to sleep. It just wasn't what we thought was the right thing to do. And so, because I don't believe a kid that's 12 months old knows how to manipulate you. So we figured that, you know, if the kid was crying, they needed something.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was, and so the getting attention thing, like, what's so wrong about needing attention? You know what I mean?
Right, and that's something I have talked to a lot of, particularly my teenagers, about that I see, is that, you know, they say something and they're like, well, I don't want to make it sound like I'm trying to get attention by this, but I'm like, well, even if you are, like,
Right.
that's a good thing. We all need attention. We all need somebody to care about us. We all need somebody to listen to us. So if that's all it is, and it typically isn't, there's probably a lot more to it than that, and it's not necessarily even so as bad as we can kind of paint it out to be.
So for a parent of a teen who is doing self-harm, what would you say to a parent that has a kid who's doing that?
So I think that if they are doing that and you are aware of it, that you are in a very different position than a lot of parents are. Sometimes kids do it and hide it, and so if you have knowledge of that, you should really consider that like good information to have. That's kind of a signifier that they trust you to tell you that, if that's kind of how you came about that knowledge. It's about being an open support to them, you know, talking to them about, what do you need when you're feeling this way? How can I be supportive of you? And also limiting access to things that are going to be harmful to them. So when there are kids who are cutting, one of the things, I make safety plans with people, and anything with sharp needs to be locked up, things like that. So it's a both and. It's making sure they're safe, but also being that present support and understanding that what they're feeling is very real.
Right, not being dismissive, giving them,
Yep.
listening to them,
Yep.
offering your attention
Mm-hmm.
to them. It seems like that's so much more simple than we make it out to be. Like, if we just paid attention to our children and loved them, a lot of these things would go away. Do you agree or disagree?
I don't know if a lot of them would go away. Again, lots of factors, but I think that this idea that meeting people where they're at is kind of hard for us because we have this idea of, well, this is what struggle means, and so when somebody's struggle doesn't fit into that category, we kind of tend to be more dismissive of that. Well, it's not so bad because this other stuff is happening, when it truly, everybody's struggle is significant.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so let's move on a little bit to anxiety, because that was a big thing that a lot of us were dealing with and thinking about. What is anxiety? Quick answer.
Quick answer is an intense fear or worry that just doesn't go away. It gets worse, it can interfere with daily activities, so a lot of people have trouble sleeping, performing, things like that.
Stops a lot of the things that people want to do.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a panic attack and an anxiety attack?
A panic attack is very, very physical, so a lot of people end up going to emergency rooms because they think they're having a heart attack. That's how intense a panic attack can be. An anxiety attack does have some physical components. It builds up more and it tends to cause problems with sleeping and things like that, whereas an panic attack, is more physical and more immediate. There's no real build up to it.
Okay. So people with anxiety, it seems like one of the things that I heard a lot was that they want to be around people.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll make plans and then cancel them. What are some of the contributors to that? I want this thing, but then at the last minute I'm gonna shut this down. Why does that happen?
So I think that as it gets closer, that's when the anxiety builds for people. So they want to have these relationships, they want to participate, they want to kind of do quote unquote normal things. And so they absolutely, when they hear about it, they're like, yeah, I want to do that, I agree. I will be there. And then the anxiety starts building. So whatever the fear is, if it's being around people, if it's what people are thinking about me, if it's crowds of people, that builds up and it becomes so intense that it's easier to cancel and just not participate at all than it is to face it.
Yeah, I actually love canceling plans. And I'm a big time extrovert. It means I don't have to go to a thing. Yeah, and so I kind of understand that. Kind of, not really, but kind of. We were wanting to discuss why anxiety often displays itself as anger and irritability.
Mm-hmm.
Why does it come out that way?
So a few different reasons. One is that it can just be kind of our predisposition to just display more aggressive than it is to be more internalized. So that's kind of one thing. The other thing is that it's way easier to be angry than it is to be vulnerable. So a lot of times, even depression can look like anger and irritability because it's easier to push people away and be angry than it is to say, no, I'm really struggling, these are my true feelings, and have people see how vulnerable you are. It's scary. So.
Yeah. I don't have that. I'm the exact opposite of that. Like, I am the king of vulnerability. I feel like my entire life is transparent. And if anybody asked me any question, I would answer it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm so the other side of that. What's the best way for me, because I counsel people, I see people in my office, what's the best way for me or other people who don't have anxiety to be with people who have anxiety and to love them the right way? How do we do that?
So I think first and foremost, you hear somebody out, if they're sharing with you what it is that's actually going on, you listen and you don't just like, oh yeah, okay, like you really listen to what they're saying. And beyond that, you know, ask them, like, what do you need? What can I be helpful for? Because everybody...
What if they say, I don't know?
Then you sit with them and I don't know. You're like, okay, well, we'll figure this out together. And that tends to be what I do too, is that we figure it out together. So we say, okay, you know, would it be helpful if I checked in on you every a few days and just sent you a text message. Would that be helpful? Yes or no? I don't know. Okay, well, let's just try it and see if it works and if you like it. So you kind of try to brainstorm with them. You just be with them. You be present. You follow their lead and
That's
be as supportive
important,
as
right?
possible.
To follow
Yes,
their lead
absolutely.
and not try and lead that. Tell them how they're going to heal.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to do what I tell you
Right.
to get over this thing that I have no idea what it's like.
Exactly.
Yeah. So can you help all the husbands out in the room? When we say to our wives, hey, what do you want to do tonight? Or where do you want to go for dinner? And they say, I don't know, what do we do? And is that a mental illness on our wives' part? Oh, all right, I want to keep going then. How does someone, this question came in through social media, how does someone convince a loved one that anxiety is the problem? Or how would they self-diagnose something like that? Or is that even smart? Is that like psychological WebMD?
Right,
When you go to WebMD, you think your heart's going to fall out of your chest.
Like, even if somebody were to approach me after this and say, I feel this, and this, I would not be able to diagnose you. So I think it's very difficult.
So leave her alone.
I think it's very difficult for you to say, well, I know what's going on with you, it's anxiety, and just to kind of say that. But I think that, when you have a concern about how somebody's doing, then that's a very different conversation. It's saying, look, I noticed that you're not feeling super happy lately, and you're not really going to the things that you used to go to. What's going on? And that's a very, very different conversation than saying, look, you're doing X, Y, and Z, and I know it's because you're depressed or because you're anxious. I think it's always a beneficial thing if you feel like there is something going on to get an actual diagnosis. So to see a doctor, a therapist, psychiatrist, anybody who has that ability to give you a diagnosis.
So self-diagnosing, not highly recommended.
Not for anything, like not
Right.
therapy, not medical, like get off of Google and go see somebody.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. We all pay for insurance probably, or somebody
Yeah,
does.
uh-huh.
We have insurance, so use it.
Take advantage of
Take
it.
advantage of it. All right, cool. So you said that you had some techniques for people to deal with their own depression and breathe, and maybe some breathing techniques for anxiety.
Yes.
Are there different techniques for depression and anxiety that you have?
So in terms of things I give to people right off the bat, I give deep breathing to people, everybody who comes through my doors, because I think that we don't give really enough credence to just something as simple as focusing on our breathing. And it helps to kind of clear our minds, it helps to kind of slow things down, and when we're feeling emotional distress with depression or feeling highly anxious, it's helpful, breathing is helpful. So that's something I can kind of,
So let's learn it.
yeah.
You guys
do
are all,
with
let's
everybody.
learn how to breathe, you guys.
So the purpose of this is to breathe slowly, deeply, make sure the air is not just getting into your chest, which is kind of how I think we typically breathe, and being more mindful and getting that air into our stomach. So what I tend to have people do is put one hand on their stomach, one hand on their chest, because the purpose of this is to make sure your breath is making your hand on your stomach push out and not the hand on your chest. So typically, I tell people to take a slow, deep breath of 3, hold for a second, and then breathe out for 3. So I'm going to count for you guys, and when I get to 1, 2, 3, hold, 3, 2, 1. So ready? We're going to breathe in, 1, 2, 3, hold, and breathe out, 3, 2, 1. And you repeat this 3 to 10 times is kind of the ideal. But the purpose of it is that breathing like this slows down, you're physically causing yourself to slow down. So your breathing is slowing, so your blood is slowing, and your heart is slowing, so everything is kind of calming down physically, so that hopefully mentally it's doing that as well.
I don't know, in first service when she did this, she taught us this first service, I felt like I was ready to take a nap, like I was ready to calm down and go relax. And I think it's important that changes your breathing thing, because if breathing affects so much of what's going on, then changing that, calming it down, slowing it down, self-regulating, that I think is a great thing. I do that if I have the hiccups. I'll take a spoonful of sugar. You ever done that? By the way, that's the best way to get rid of hiccups. One full, I'm gonna choke myself spoon of sugar. and they go away because it re-regulates everything because you have a mouthful of sugar.
Yep.
It's hard to get rid of. So thank you for that. I think this breathes. So if somebody's in a panic episode, what's the thing that has to happen in their brain or in their heart, mind, whatever, that they would say, I have to do breathing, I have to breathe?
So I tell people that they need to practice this when they're regulated, when you feel the calmness, because when you get to a state of emotional distress or panic, you cannot access things that are like more logical, like, okay, yeah, I need to breathe. So it's making it a habit. It's creating those connections in your brain so that it's just kind of a natural response versus like, okay, this is happening, so I need to do this. The more you practice it, the more it's just going to naturally happen.
Right. This is kind of a more difficult question, I think, for some of us to hear, but I think it's an important one for us to get at. How do childhood abuses or traumas such as physical abuse, sexual abuse, or rape lead to self-harm, anxiety, or depression?
So typically, traumas will form as PTSD, as post-traumatic stress disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder very often has co-occurring disorders like depression, anxiety, and those kinds of things. Self-harm tends to kind of be more present in people who have experienced trauma because, again, there's an intense emotional distress. Your view of the world has changed. So when you're growing up and you're developing, one of the very first things you develop is the world safe or not? And when you experience a trauma, that very core belief that you developed is now shaken. So it's something that absolutely has an impact on you and can then lead to these disorders, but particularly post-traumatic stress is one of them. Anxiety, depression, and the potential of self-harm is another.
Okay, because I was thinking about sexual abuse and rape and things like that, and if those were contributing factors for people into anxiety and depression, or if it was the fact that so many sexual abuse victims are not believed.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think so often a sexual abuse victim is not believed?
Again, I think it plays into our idea of safety. Like, we want to make sure that we are safe, and we have preconceived notions of how we stay safe. So we then believe that if I do X, Y, and Z, if I don't wear this, if I don't go here, if I don't drink too much, if I will never, ever, ever experience a sexual assault. When the very fact of the matter is that that's not the case, and the research shows that that is not the case. So I think that when people present their story and their trauma and they're not believed, it's because they do not want to believe it's possible to do all of the things that can make you stay safe, and still have a bad thing happen anyway. It's a very scary concept. It's one that I think is hopefully changing, but it's a long road.
Yeah, I think it also diminishes the person.
Absolutely.
To think like you're making it up or whatever.
Yeah, and
your pain's not real.
Right, and it's a big reason why people don't report things. It's
right.
A big reason that survivors feel so much shame and guilt because they already have that notion of, well, I could have done this differently, or I could have done that differently, and that is always the fault of the perpetrator, not the victim. And
yes.
It's very hard to shift that when societally we don't necessarily do that either.
Right. I would just say, as a church, myself, Amber, Kimber, Dane, if you are a victim of sexual abuse in any way, you can come and talk to us, and we will believe you, and we will help you any possible way that we can. I want to put that out there. I want you to know that you're not going to be like sloughed off or pushed away. We will talk to you. We will help you any possible way that we can to get through that. All right. There was another question that came in through social media, talking about students with mental illness. Does it help or hinder to share their diagnosis with teachers, coaches, staff, youth pastors, anything like that?
It's absolutely helpful. I actually encourage the students I see often to let people in, because there are going to be times they're in school and they're not feeling their best, and if they have somebody who knows what's going on, they're able to access those resources. It gives people a really fuller picture of how to be a support to those people. So I think absolutely sharing is good.
Okay, thanks. So if you're a parent and that's a thing, then make sure the appropriate authorities in your children's lives are aware of where they're at.
I'm going to actually correct that.
Sweet.
Yeah. I wouldn't, unless it's a safety situation, I wouldn't share that for them.
Okay.
I would allow the child to do that themselves. I mean, there's a certain age at which, like, if they're very, very young, you need to be the one to share that. But teenagers, and they need to be the ones.
They got to tell their own
That's
story.
their story. They
Yeah.
need to share.
All right, sorry that I ruined. See, this is why we had to bring a professional here, because I screw stuff up. All right. We had a question that came in. Can someone be therapy resistant? I'll tell you something funny about this question. It came in, and I didn't realize that it was a question for you, so I started answering it. And they were like, no, that's for the therapist. And I was like, oh, crap, I'm sorry. I hope I didn't ruin that. Can someone be therapy resistant? Is someone so damaged that therapy and counseling won't work?
I do not believe there's such a thing as therapy resistant. I think that there are times if you're trying therapy and it's not working, there may be other things to kind of examine. One of them is there a medical component to this? So is something like an SSRI, like to help with depression, needed in order to get the full benefit of therapy?
What is that?
An SSRI is an antidepressant medication.
Okay.
Sorry, I got clinically. So the other factor is, and I think it's a very difficult thing for somebody who's getting therapy, is that you need to examine whether or not the fit of you and your therapist works. I mean, therapy is a relationship. So if you're not connecting with your therapist, a good therapist will realize that it's like they won't take offense to that, and they will understand that, yes, okay,
Just don't work.
this is not connecting. If you're not feeling connected, you need to find somebody you will feel connected with. And I think a lot of people try therapy and walk away because they didn't have a good fit and they need a good fit. But the idea is, is somebody so damaged? No, I think that that's akin to saying, I am too damaged for God's love. I don't believe there's such a thing as somebody who cannot get better and who cannot heal.
I love that answer. Thank you for that. I mentioned that I thought maybe therapy is stubborn, and I get this a lot where people will ask me questions about how to deal with a certain thing, and I'll give my best response based on my experience and knowledge or whatever. And there's always a yeah, but kind of thing. And so I wonder if, I'm sure you see that in your practice as well. What do you do with people who always, the answer is laid out plain, but there's a yeah, but? What do you do about that? How do you encourage them to?
So if the but is really true, like, okay, there's a really significant barrier that we need to kind of figure out, then we talk about that.
Yeah.
If it seems like it's just an excuse to not do something, then I tell them to give me that answer, but take out the rest. From but on, just figure out.
Remove your butt.
Remove the but.
Okay. It's important because healing does take time. It does take several factors, and Jesus always asked people, "Do you want to get well?" Because he knew that there's another side to that. Like some of the people who were beggars that Jesus healed, they then had to work. So that's a different. Before they were paralyzed and couldn't do anything, or had leprosy or whatever. And now, do you want to get well? Yes, I want to get well. And now you have to go and act and do. And I think it just signifies that there's another side to our pain and to the struggle and to the stuff that we go through. And sometimes, if we're not the ones struggling, it's hard for us to understand that it's very difficult for the person who is struggling to muddle to the next side of that, or to work through the next side of that. There's a verse in Proverbs 12:25. It says, "Anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up." I want you to react to the following statement. "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me."
It's ridiculous. That's just like my gut reaction. It's ridiculous. I think words have a huge impact on people. I think we need to be mindful of how we speak to people who have all sorts of things going on, whether it's a struggle, whether it's mental illness. Words can very much carry into how somebody has a concept of themselves. So we need to treat people with loving words. So the idea that they won't hurt is just not true.
Yeah, I get the idea of it. This is what I was told when I was a kid, and then mean things would be said. You know what I mean? And then I would hurt. So I understand that's, and I've said that before, that it's totally ridiculous. So thank you for professionally stamping my idea about that. So this is our last question for Melissa, because we're almost out of time. How do I know I need help? How do I get started? What do I do? What's the next step? If I'm thinking that something is going on that I need to deal with, what's the next step for me?
So I think the next step is absolutely just to call somebody to get that support. So I think that if there's something going on and you're feeling depressed, anxious, any sort of way about it, and it's not changing, it's not getting better. I mean, depression itself only takes the symptoms to be there for 2 weeks to diagnose as clinical depression. Then it's time to give somebody a call. There's lots of resources out there. There's agencies, there's Psychology Today, which is a great resource to just look up who is in the community providing therapy. I think it's a good baseline to start with therapy. Any good therapist who thinks, okay, maybe there's like a medication component that is needed here, will be able to then refer that to somebody like a psychiatrist or nurse practitioner who can then prescribe medications as well.
All right, let's give out your personal cell phone number here. So everyone can text
My
you.
cell phone number
Just
is my
kidding.
work number, so it wouldn't be
Melissa, thank you for this. Thank you for everything that you've come and shared with us. And Melissa's around, and she's okay, I think, with asking a few questions afterwards. But she has a family, so you understand what I mean. So thanks so much. I want to close with just one verse today, as the band is going to lead us in a song that I think is just a fantastic way to close our service today. You guys can go ahead. But I want to read Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, and it says this. This is Jesus' words. It says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find sweet rest for your souls." Jesus is beckoning us into him. He is calling us into his fold. He says that he desires to put his arm around us, to heal us, and to bring us close to him. And so I would encourage you in your life and in your struggles and everything you're dealing with, bring that stuff to Jesus. Bring your life to Jesus. Come to Jesus, because he is there to elevate you, to lift you into him. You guys, would you stand? Let's close with this song.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You were getting so good to no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. Amen. We'll see you guys next week.
I'm tired.